Welcome to the Outer Realm with MicheleDerocher and Amelia Pisano. Airing live on the United Public Radio Network, 105.3 FM in New Orleans.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Thursday night segment of The Outer Realm. We're broadcasting live, as always, on the United Public Radio Network, UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 FM from the Gulf Coast and 107.7 FM from New Orleans. We're fully sponsored by the amazing people over at Folgers Coffee, who have been a part of our journey for the last few years. We appreciate you so very much, Folgers. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And it just doesn't seem like enough. Also, truly grateful for Justice Snicker, aka Dr. Snick the Sonic Surgeon, for the contribution of his time, his music, and his voice for the intro you just heard. He's an award-winning composer of Halloween horror, sci-fi, and dark wave electronic music, which can be found on all of your favorite music streaming platforms. Also, thank you to Steve McGinnis, the artist behind the banners and logos here at the show. Check him out on Facebook and Instagram. Also specializes in the horror genre, but does amazing commission pieces of any type. So we welcome back Morgan Daimler. God, just love her. You know, she's a folklorist. She's very, very well researched. And she's going to be talking about the ancient Druids and Pagans and the Celts and how they all sort of, how they all sort of work together, how they're all sort of conjoined, I guess, is the best way to put it. So it's going to be really exciting because it's really been difficult to find anyone to talk about just Druids per se. It's very, very hard. There's limited information from what I understand because everything they had was oral history. Nothing was ever written down. They're very mysterious bunch. So it's going to be really fascinating to go through this. And we're just waiting for her to come in. Mom, of course, Bubbles, Amelia, still down. It's just like, this bug of hers is just like gift that keeps on giving, like a bad habit. So it's just not relinquishing its hold on her at all. So sending her some love and light and hoping that she's slowly getting there. So tonight, hello, Michael. Nice to see you. So are we. God, really looking forward to it. Hello, Dolly. Catherine, just getting ahead of the game. I love it. How are you? So making our way down the list. Richard, you did make it. Look at you go. Here we are. Yes, you caught the start for once. I love it. That's outstanding. Hello, Melissa. Hello. Where are we? Who am I missing? Where are you? Hello, Wayne. You actually made it on time again, too. This is great. Ahead of the game. Hello, Sherry. Oh, God. Hello, Mark. Hello. A big hello to Mark's dad if he's watching. Maybe not. It's kind of late out in the UK. I always say you're a champ for being here. So where are we going? Still making our way. Hello, Alan. I see you're here as well. Oh my gosh, everybody's just chiming in. I know, right? So, oh my gosh. Okay, still making my way. People chiming in from other pages. So, here we go. Hi, Alan. I like that. Just cover everybody. That works. Just saves a lot of writing, doesn't it? So there we go. Wow, this is great. And for those who maybe new, to the show, those in X and on Rumble, we should be able to see your comments that come up in the chat. Sometimes it's a bit sketchy. It doesn't always work for whatever reason. It gets a bit glitchy, but please feel free to try if you have any questions. I'm trying to keep an eye on the different platforms as we progress through the evening. So I'm seeing we are live. It's quite a few guys there watching. So perfect. I love it. I love it. So as we wait for Morgan to enter, um, remember, guys, we have quite a few platforms that we're streaming live on, and I will periodically just flash up your comments, and I will tag the questions. So this way, we can keep up with Morgan and let her go. So that's the way we can, it's about the guests after all. But you guys are so awesome with so much good input that I want to make sure we get you guys fully all the information possible. So I'm just going to double check her and message and get her. Bear with me, guys. Bear with me, please. Please, 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 please. I want to make sure she got the link, because sometimes, technology just has a way of not agreeing with you. All right, here we go. Sent you. Okay. There. Okay, good. Perfect. Here we are. And back. Sorry. So, all right. I'm just listening. Hold on. I try to say hi to everybody. I feel bad if you missed anyone. I know it's really tough. It's really tough. We're kind of like family in this chat room, aren't we? I think it's just so awesome the way you all interact with one another. And our guests can see everything, by the way. So tell Amelia we love her and miss her. She rocks. Yes. And I'm hoping she's listening in. Sometimes you don't feel good. You tend to sleep a lot, but she needs to, because unfortunately, it's just the only way that you can get ahead of the game with this. It's just a really bad bug. It just seems like so many people are having it. But while we're waiting, I want to just go over real quick next week's guests. It's going to be amazing, an amazing week. And if I have not mentioned it yet, I think I kind of went in there real quick yesterday, but we are having another show this coming Tuesday afternoon, 2 p.m. Eastern. This one is not so much uncensored. Mind you, it can be, but we're bringing on board Jamie Corstefine. And I'll tell you something. He's a manager of the award-winning City of the Dead tours in Edinburgh, Scotland. Myself, my son, and my pal and team member, Adriana, all did this tour. You guys want to learn about, the Mackenzie poltergeist, right? Just crazy stuff. You want to learn about the underground vaults in Scotland. Oh my gosh, this place is like nothing I've ever experienced. It was just unbelievable. You're not going to want to miss it. He has sent over some pretty incredible photos, and we're going to share it all up. It's just going to be so wild, I swear. I can't wait to get back there and do it again. And then I just found out they have like a double City of the Dead tours. I'm like, double? What did I miss? Can't be possibly any better than it already was. So it's really going to be a wild show. So again, that's going to be 2 p.m. on our spin-off show, Beyond the Outer Realm. So you're going to want to look for that one. It will be advertised. It will be going up with links, etc. And Wednesday, of course, we bring back Dr. Rita Louise, and we're going to be talking about her book, The Dysfunctional Dance of the Empath and the Narcissist. We did this show really early days, and she's edited and done a lot of changes in the meantime. And empaths and narcissists, it's just like one of these things. And she's just a hoot to start with. And we're going to go over all of that again. We've actually had a lot of requests for this. It is just amazing. It's an amazing topic. And then you guys who are empathic out there realize, like, why can't you get along with certain people? This could possibly be it. And then we welcome back on Thursday, David Stig Hansen. He's been on the show before. This is his part 2. You've seen him in the chat room, and he was basically doing a lot of research in the Eye of Africa, I believe it is, for Atlantis. And he's come across something over there and having it all tested. So I'm sure we're going to get the update. But essentially, it's going to be his research on Atlantis right here in North America, right? So that's going to be a whole load of fun right there. So I'm going to do this again. Send another link here because I think I'm not seeing it. Okay, let's just try this one. Okay. Email. Yeah, I don't know. I got nothing. Should be there, but then just click on this one. Okay, hold on, guys. Okay, so we'll see. She's going to go in and have a little hunt here. Oh my gosh, I love it when technology works. It really works. When it does not work, oh, not so much. Not so much fun at all. So, okay. Hold on. Okay, so I'm not really sure. Oh, there she is. Awesome. All right. I'm still fumbling with trying to find other emails. So, oh, it's been a day. It's been a day. Okay. Hi, Z-Sun. How's it going? Hello, beautiful Dr. Yana. Hello, Contessa. Oh my gosh. Okay, you guys are awesome. Nice to see you all in here. So without further ado, uh sounds like my cats. Oh, sounds like one of my cats, I can assure you that. I was trying to figure out which one it is, and I'm leaning towards the narcissist part. So anyway, here we go, guys. Put your seatbelts on. We're gonna get started. Hello.
Hello. I think my email ate your email, so.
Right. I'm like, is there another email in here somewhere? So
yeah, it's every now and then because I have an older email server.
Me too. I have the same. Yeah, I love it. I love it though. It's one of those things that everybody has and you just can't get away from because everybody's had it for so long. We're talking about mine's AOL.
Same.
Right? Just can't get rid of it.
The ancient AOL.
I know. It's just crazy. It's just like, but like I say, it's been around so long. So many people have it. When I still get emails from them, like, God, it's still going. So, but every now and then it glitches.
Every now and then it just seems to take a little extra time.
Yes.
To get the email. So that's okay. I'm here now.
It'll come after the show. Probably. So
just in time for this to be over.
That's right. Well, welcome back. Oh my gosh, it's just such a pleasure to have you. I've really been looking forward to this. I think we sort of chatted a little bit basically about how difficult it is to get proper research, and I will stress that proper research on Druids and the connection, like the ancient Druids and even modern day Druids, that have somewhat carried over, and, the Celts and the, paganism, how everything fits in, because so many people confuse everything, not realizing that the Druids really, it's oral history for the most part. Right.
It's one of those tricky subjects where we have more information, I think, than a lot of people realize we have.
Okay, good.
But we also have less information.
Okay, good. Just tell me where you're going with it, Morgan.
Yeah, well, it's just one of those things where, like, you'll hear some people who will say, like, we know nothing. We know nothing about them. We have no information, nothing to work with. And that's not true. We do have some.
Right.
Particularly like secondary source material, but we do have some.
Right.
And then you have other people who will say that we, know just absolutely everything, and we definitely don't. It's kind of in the middle.
So, well, I don't even know where to start, really. I mean, it's one of those things that, people have been fascinated with, and I don't think they realize. I mean, this is going to be the next show we're going to do. All this great North American stuff, but with all of this, I truly believe the Celts, everybody made it over to this side of the world at one point or another. They're starting to look like perhaps this happened. But, when you're thinking back to these ancient, almost like they were an elite class of people within their cultures. And,
Yeah. So the older Celtic language speaking cultures, we call like the historic Celtic culture. A lot of people don't realize it was not exactly a caste based culture, but it was something close.
Okay.
You basically, if you were born and your parents were farmers, you would be a farmer. If you were born and your parents were warriors, you would be a warrior. It was just sort of like you were kind of born into your
class.
Yeah.
Yes.
And there was a little bit of leeway, which is why I say it wasn't strictly a caste system, but the way the legal system was, like your I would say value because that makes it sound bad, but like if someone committed a crime against you, it was a restorative justice system, so they would owe you, they would have to pay you for whatever they had done, and how much they had to pay you was based on things including like where you were in society. And so it was possible for someone to move to a different, career, different strata, whatever, but you wouldn't have as much value in that as someone who was born into it.
Wow. Right.
Yeah. So like poets, for example, if you're a poet, but your parents weren't, then your value wasn't as high for the justice system as someone whose, father was also a poet. And if you could trace it back 3 generations, that was sort of like the, pun intended, magic number.
Right.
Where you kind of max out on what you
yeah, you're done. That's it.
Right. So Druids were one of the caste, well, I shouldn't say caste after I just explained why they're not quite a caste, but one of the classes in society. So people could be born into it, like their parent was a druid, so then they would be a druid, but you could also come in from the outside and train in it based on the information that we have. But yeah, it was an interesting and complicated system.
Okay, so who were they exactly, and what made them so important?
Yeah, so we have some pretty decent resources, like I said, for understanding this. Some of it is based on secondary sources, so that means like you mentioned at the start, it was an oral culture. We don't have things necessarily written down by these people, but we have things that were written down by like the Romans and the Greeks and other cultures that interacted with them. We have material written down even by the early Christians. A lot of people have this idea, like with Ireland, for example, that Christianity came in the 4th century and then that was it, 5th century, and that was it, and then everyone was Christian after that. But it didn't quite work that way.
Okay.
They did come in, we have Christian monasteries established by early 400s. But even in the 900s, with the law system, there's still reference to Druids. It was a very slow sort of move from one to the other.
Right.
So the early material talking about Druids is fairly trustworthy for what it says. It's not until it gets later that it gets real wacky.
Right, I know.
Creative.
I want to touch on the St. Patrick part of all this. We don't have you for March, so we want to touch on that as we move later on.
We can definitely do that.
Wizard wars and all kinds of stuff. It's like, oh, this is good stuff. So
definitely get into that for sure. So the Celtic culture historically covered a lot of Western Europe and obviously the UK and Ireland. So it was very widespread, and it wasn't like one cohesive culture. It was more like a lot of individual groups that shared kind of a base culture, like related languages, related myths, related art, that kind of stuff. And in all of them that we have information on, we know that Druids were an important part of their society. They were sort of the learned class, like the educated people. They would advise kings. They had a role particularly in things like either peacemaking or declaring war, major big decisions. They also encompassed what we today and like later Celtic language cultures would say, like lawyers and poets. Those were all sort of part of this wider group.
Mm-hmm.
It was the Druids. So they were very significant when they were around. The Romans hated them with a passion.
Yes.
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 Yeah. Well, they had this pesky habit of like inciting rebellions against Rome. And Rome wasn't
that could do it. That could do it.
Yeah, surprisingly.
Right.
So yeah, the Romans don't have a lot of good things to say about the Druids. And they did kind of put a lot of effort into getting rid of them in Gaul, which would have been the continental Europe part of what we're talking about. So yes, that's a little bit of what they did.
Well, I like how
obviously as priests, like connecting to the gods. I'm sorry, I skipped over like the most important part.
Yeah, I was going to say, I like little bits of information out there, how they were, how they sort of mediated between the living and the gods per se. Yeah.
I got so sidetracked on the other stuff that they did that like the most important thing, of course, is that they were priests,
right?
Or priestesses, and
right,
kind of acted as that go between for the humans and the gods and the spirits.
Right. So how would they actually do that? I mean, being, the priests, yes. Back then they would, like many cultures, that they perform sacrifices and such. What were their ceremonial practices?
Yeah, so this is one of those areas where we have some information, but not all of the information.
Right.
So we know like who the gods were in different places with different like tribal groups. We have a general idea of how they would have been approached. And we can kind of fill in some of the blanks based on looking at like similar cultures nearby that we do know more about. We know that they were often called on to do animal sacrifices, not to offend anyone in the audience that doesn't hear that, but
of course.
Usually for divination purposes, because that obviously is a big thing. Back then, you want to know how the winter is going to go, how the war is going to go, how the new king is going to be, things like that.
Well, those are the way of the world back then. Like they weren't the only ones to have done anything like that. It was pretty status quo,
Right, right. And we are talking, 2,000 years ago.
Exactly.
So for context.
Yes, exactly. Hi, Michael.
We have some references to things like sacred groves. So we don't have any surviving temples in the sense of like built or manufactured structures. So the common thought, and this is, again, I'm talking about Gaul specifically here. The common thought is that they probably worshipped in like in groves of trees. That was considered sacred to them. And that was something, again, the Romans and the later Christians, when they were trying to get rid of the Druids and the pagan religion, one of the things they would do would be to, chop down the sacred groves and build churches and things. Yeah.
Surprise. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. It was a little different in Ireland. We do have some structures there that were built. And that's just a little bit of a cultural difference, from one place to another.
So where were they primarily? Like, I mean, UK is primarily, that is home base for them. Is this where they originated?
I mean, again, they'd be covering like Ireland, the UK, parts of continental Europe. The main theory, and I'm going to emphasize theory because this is actually really debated.
Yes, okay.
And I know
I like the debated stuff, sure.
Yeah, that's the fun stuff. I just know there's going to be someone who's going to pop into the comments and be like, actually, that's opposite of that.
We're here to learn. We're here to learn.
Yeah. So I am aware that there are conflicting theories, but the main popular theory that's been around probably for the longest amount of time is that they originated in probably Eastern Europe, and probably, if you go back far enough, India.
Oh, wow. I never would have guessed that.
Yeah. That at some point, groups of people migrated west from India and became the Indo-Europeans. who then settled everything.
Mm-hmm.
And that one branch of that became the Proto-Celtic and then Celtic culture.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of the earliest evidence we have for them is more in like the area of like Switzerland and Germany and kind of out there.
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah.
I did not see that coming.
Well, and see, and this is where this other theory comes in, because there is a conflicting theory that says they started actually in Ireland and went east from there.
Mm-hmm.
But it's theories. Like we don't have enough evidence to actually know for sure which one of these is true or what actually happened. From the east theory from India and then into the Germany and then etc. is the oldest one. That one's been around for quite a while. And then the coming from Ireland and going west, Celtic from the west is what it's called. And going east is kind of a newer, relatively newer theory.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think about it, the Celts were said to have gone down as far as Egypt, right? So, I mean, if there's a connection there, they made it as far as Egypt because King Akhenaten had Celts as part of his guard. And if I'm not mistaken, his daughter, who ended up being Scotia, who ended up going back to Scotland, died there because they actually found her grave next to a pub in Ireland.
A lot of the mythology ties, particularly in Ireland, ties it to Egypt and Greece and the Mediterranean. So
it's possible that your theory is correct.
In theory.
Yeah.
That's the fun part about theories, though, is we have evidence that'll support certain things. Like they've done, for example, part of what we find in Irish mythology is this idea that the Celts, the people that we would call, the Gaels, came from Iberia, the Iberian Peninsula. And this has always been sort of considered like pseudo history, but they had done some DNA testing and genetic testing and actually traced them back and shown that actually there was a settlement of people from that area that came to Ireland. So, how that intersects with the mythology and where the truth is, it's in there somewhere.
It's a really deep rabbit hole, and that's what I'm saying. Like it's so diverse, it's really hard to peg down an exact, because you could say Egypt, you could say Greece, right? And there's a cross between Alexander the Great, Greece, Egypt, Cleopatra, all of that, the Ptolemies. But when it comes down to cultures, well, you think it would be fairly simple to pinpoint. It's really not.
Yeah. And, it's surprising. Well, I shouldn't say maybe it's not surprising. I don't know how the audience feels about this, but I think we tend to, when we think about 2,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago, we picture things being very like insular, very, close together. But actually there was so much trade that happened. Like there's a pretty famous cauldron. It's in Denmark now in a museum, but it's found in Denmark that is Celtic, that they believe was built in Thrace, which is in the Mediterranean. And there's a location in Ireland, in Armagh in Northern Ireland, called Ewan, which is the site of a very, very old, both a settlement and what they believe is a religious like temple. And they found, among other like bones that they assume are animals that were part of ritual sacrifices, but they found an ape, which clearly was from Africa and made it all the way to Ireland. So it's just amazing, like how far reaching everything was.
It is. I think people don't realize how much they traveled all over the world, really, but especially
they got around.
They did get around. I think we spoke a little bit at one point where they even found a Stonehenge type structure in Lake Michigan next to a big stone with a petroglyph of a petroglyph, I guess, of a mastodon. So it tells you that's pre-Ice Age.
Yeah, there's been some really interesting finds in different places that they're still being, I think, examined and people are trying to understand them. and I see someone in the chat is pointing out Turkey is the oldest. I'm not going to pronounce it correctly, so I apologize. But Göbekli Tepe is...
Yes, Göbekli Tepe.
There you go.
They just found one older than that, too.
Did they? I haven't heard about that one yet.
Yeah, yeah, they have. Well, they reburied Göbekli Tepe. Bit of a bone of contention, so you can't really get me too started on it. But right. I know. What are they trying to hide? That's all I'm going to say. Leave it there. It's another rabbit hole. But yes, they're very ancient cultures out there.
Yeah, because I think that one in Turkey goes back, what is it, 12,000 years, 2,500? I mean, it's a crazy amount of time.
Yes,
it
is.
When you stop and actually think about how far back that is,
yes.
for them to be building, stone circles, it's fascinating stuff.
It's very fascinating. And it's interesting when you find it on this side of the world where you don't really expect it. You know.
Never know what you're going to find.
I know. Isn't it exciting? I'm working on a series coming up. I'm just consulting on an area that was pre-Columbian and the things that they find. And it's not very far from this site that's in Lake Michigan. So it kind of makes you wonder just how pre-Columbian is it? Like they are finding things, and you're hearing stories all the time. And we know cultures there, they've been finding evidence of stuff going back 25,000 years, finding, human footsteps, like footprints.
I always try to keep an open mind because, obviously there is stuff out there that's faked and not as old, and then we just don't know.
I think it's in the salt lands, the salt flats out there. They found it. You could probably find it. Yeah.
But I try to remind myself that for a long time, they used to say that the Vikings had made it to North America, and everyone was like, no, they didn't. There's no evidence of that. That never happened. And then they found the site, Lanceau Meadow, which again, I don't speak French, so that was horrible. But
yes.
In Canada,
yes,
and proved with the archaeology that in fact there was at least a small settlement here in North America 1,000 years ago. So
yeah,
you always have to keep an open mind with things, possibilities.
The Earth gives up her secrets, the planet, at some point. If the Earth truly is billions of years old, humanity has been around for eons, has probably gotten way more advanced than we are now. 100%. I agree. We are not as advanced as some of these ancient people were.
We might be moving backwards at this point.
I think so. Yeah, Sherry says it's in Newfoundland, so she's from there, so she knows.
I couldn't remember if it was Newfoundland or Labrador, and I didn't want to say the wrong one. So thank you. Yes,
no, that's fantastic. There's a lot out there coming in from the East Coast. Obviously, they were so much closer. So basically, then why do you think that they didn't? These guys were like many ancient cultures. I always go back to the Gnostics and things like that because they followed the stars. They were aware of, they were astrologists. They knew how everything worked. But you have so many written records of these guys. Why do you, of all these cultures, for the most part, why do you think they chose to just not divulge anything about themselves?
I think there's always a chance that we have more in writing than we know that we have. Mm-hmm. But from what I'm aware of, the academic arguments, all of that, which to make sense to me, is that part of it was that even though they could write, because the cultures in Gaul and Ireland and elsewhere, they did have written languages, they did employ writing, but there seemed to have been an idea that passing things along orally, having to memorize hundreds and hundreds of traditional stories and the laws and all this other stuff, it was a test of skill in a way. Okay. You had to prove that you could do that in order to achieve the highest ranks. Otherwise, you would be stuck at lower levels because everything, of course, is
right,
just like today.
It's like it's a test.
Yeah.
This is a quiz.
Yeah, so
Right.
basically you had to prove that that you had that ability to memorize these things and retain this information.
Mm-hmm.
They would memorize genealogy back, a ridiculous amount of generations, and be able to recite it for all of these particular like prominent families,
Mm-hmm.
on top of all of these myths and all of these stories. And it's just amazing when you stop and think about it,
Mm-hmm.
just how much of that they were doing. So they seem to feel that writing it down would make people lazy, I guess is the easiest way to put it.
Oh my God. I have to say, they're just champs because I mean, you looking at these people, they were philosophers, they were poets. They, like you say, they maintained legal authority in some cases. They advised people who were high up. They just did so much. I mean, they measured time. They knew how to create a calendar. They could synchronize all of this, the solar year, the lunar month. I mean, how do you not have record of that? How do you just stay up here and everybody just, yeah, we all get it? I'd be just like, and I'm pretty swift. I mean, I'm a diehard researcher. I retain a lot, but I think even that would be a bit much.
Yeah, it was definitely a skill, I think. I'm sure they had ways to help. Like we know, for example, with the Ogham, which was in Ireland, it was an alphabet. It was the earliest alphabet we're aware of that was indigenous to Ireland. But we know that they had all these mnemonic devices for remembering it.
Yes.
A lot of people are familiar with the tree Ogham. Like everyone talks about that, where the letter B is the birch tree and etc.
Yeah.
But that's the most famous one. They actually had dozens of those. So they have like a pig Ogham, which is one I love. They have a bird Ogham. They had and they were all different ways to help remember the information, retain it, which is, I think, really cool. And that is stuff that we did eventually get written down, so we still have it. And of course, with the calendar system in Gaul, they did write that down because we have an example of that, and the Caligny calendar, because they had a lunar solar layer. I swear I can speak English.
That's right.
Year.
Right.
So it was basically an interlocking system that used the solar year as well as the months based on the moon to time everything, which is very complicated.
Right. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Like
that's stuff they did write down.
Right. Lots to it, but amazing stuff. So people tend to confuse, Celts, pagans, and they lump everybody all together, and that's it. They just assume it all worked the same. How do they all differ for one another? Like one big giant community just did different things, or are they really very separate in the way everything was done?
So when we're talking about Celtic culture, we're talking about like the overarching culture.
Yes.
The language and the art and the myths.
Yes.
Within that, you would have the Druids as like a social class. That culture would originally have been a pagan culture. They would have had many gods. We know of some of them in Gaul because we have inscriptions during the Roman period on like altars and things like that.
Yes.
And we have some of the Irish ones were written down later by the Christian monks and scribes, so we have information on them. But they would have been different in different places. Like there would have been some that were maybe similar or shared, but there also would have been just regional beliefs. So it's complicated. It's all these interlocking parts.
Yes.
Yeah.
It seems very diverse, but that's why I'm trying to get clarification for the masses, people who are listening, because they are lumped together. I get you, the Celts, you break down, right? Out of that, you have your subcultures from all of that. And again, you have like your Druids. So how do the pagans fall into all of this?
Yep. So,
Celts and Pagans? How do you break that down?
yeah, the Celtic culture would originally have been a pagan culture, and then as Christianity spread, it would have sort of slowly in most places changed over. Like I mentioned in Ireland, they were pagan, and then the Christians started settling in the 5th century, and then it still took another about 400 years before most paganism was sort of not a major thing over there anymore.
Right. Right.
So,
Yeah, because I mean, pagans did include Wiccans or Druids or heathens. I guess a blend of everything.
yeah, so when we say pagan, that would have been just like kind of what everyone would have believed in multiple gods.
Yes.
And then you would have had different types of, I don't know what we would call it now, practitioners.
Yes.
So you would have had, druids who were sort of the priestessly, if that's a word.
Yes.
And you would have had, what we would say refer to as like witches, and just different types of people within that sort of wider grouping. And I do want to say, because I get this a lot as a confusion, there were female druids.
Yes.
We have references to them
Yes.
kind of all over the place. I don't know why this idea kind of got going at some point that druids were only ever men.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, so, I mean, we know that they sort of merged. Obviously, they were not, because there are people today who are self-proclaimed druids and seem to have picked up the way of life, of these ancient people. So I don't know what I mean. There would have to be a whole different thing now, because we don't have they're not going to consult the same way that they used to be. And when we figured, we talk a little bit more about them, with the St. Patrick's thing, they obviously don't do stuff like that anymore. So is it just another way of life, essentially, that just keeping the traditions alive? The oral history still exists, I guess, is where I'm going.
Yeah, it's interesting because we have a certain amount of information.
Yes.
And we do know that at one point, at least, a lot of the Druids seem to have sort of merged into the church. And then we had the Celtic Church, and then the Catholic Church, which wasn't the Catholic Church at the time because it was just the only
kind of
priest-schism. But they did not like this.
Yeah.
They were not fans of the Celtic Church.
Right.
So that ended up becoming a problem. We do think, though, that that's at least partially how certain material survived. Was that it kind of got incorporated, got written down during this period. And then there was a period of time, at least, where there didn't really seem to be druids as like an active presence. You will run across people who say that like they were there in secret. There's really nothing to kind of support that as an idea. So I'm just gonna again say this before people jump in.
We have a good group. You're safe here.
Seems like a good group. And then in the 18th century, we start to see this revival. And initially it's Christians. They were not pagans that were doing this, but they liked certain ideas that the Druids had, things they felt the Druids embodied, along those lines, the cultural aspect of it, all of these things. And then we do start to see sort of the pagan Druids coming back. And now, honestly, there's so much diversity in who, will label themselves as a Druid today. We have national organizations in the US and in England and Ireland. Very few of them agree on anything. And I don't think any of them is necessarily, the right, correct. These are the true Druids of the day. I think we just have a lot of different perspectives. And people sort of, all searching for the truth.
Yes.
In their own ways.
Yes.
But yeah, so it's a range. There's a lot out there now.
There's a lot out there for sure. Dolly says, I learned that the oral traditions of the Knights Templars, as well as Masons, learned their methods and philosophy of Druids.
Yep, that's certainly one of the theories is out there. The Knights Templar, I don't know a ton about them, I want to say up front, because that's not kind of my bailiwick, but they're a very fascinating group. Both sort of what they were doing, and then there's so many legends that have sprung up around them. You know, since that unfortunate Friday the 13th in 1313. That's where the whole thing about Friday the 13th being unlucky comes from, for anyone that didn't know.
It's true. Yeah, it's true. I've always had great Friday the 13th, just saying, but I'm a bit of a weirdo like that.
It was my dad's birthday, so I've always...
So you don't want to say it's a bad luck day.
Right. So it was good luck for him and me. So
right, exactly. Michael says, Morgan, any stories from this time that could have been extraterrestrial?
So that's another theory that's out there.
Okay.
And I want to say up front, I have a certain amount of bias here because there's, and I don't know if I've said this on previous shows, there's sort of two opposing views. There's the people who are very into the fairy end of things, which is kind of where I'm at, who tend to see a lot of things as being fairies,
right?
Including modern like aliens and extraterrestrial stories and alien abductions and UFOs. And then there's the people that are into the ufology end of things that have the exact opposite view,
right?
Where instead everything, you know, historically would have been aliens and all of that, and ultimately it just comes down to what you believe based on the evidence. Joshua Cutchin has written some really good books exploring the crossovers between fairy belief, alien belief, and particularly Sasquatch and Bigfoot belief.
Yes.
And Jack Valley has a good book too, Passport to Mongolia, I think it's called. Cutchin's book is Trojan Feast, his first one. And I think honestly, like my bias aside, the evidence is so overlapping and so similar that I think you can equally argue any of these points.
Right.
You could say, yes, these were, you know, extraterrestrials when we have the story of the Tuatha and the old Irish gods coming out of the sky in ships and landing on top of a mountain. I've definitely seen plenty of people interpreting that as a UFO alien thing. You can have people look at it the other way and say, you know, they were coming from, you know, another dimension, another reality, the world of fairy, whatever you want to call it. And that's kind of what I love about this subject, is that because we don't have definitive answers, which is a good thing in my opinion.
Yes.
There's so much room for interpretation, and there's so much room for people to kind of decide for themselves what they think.
There is a lot out there. I've read accounts where, you know, the Fae were actually, I mean, they would help people. They were very, very forthcoming with people. They were active parts of within these cultures, and along comes the church, and they got driven, you know, they say they were driven underground, and you started seeing less and less of them, and they started having disdain for people per se, you know, because they're just they turned on them.
You can't blame them.
No, I don't blame them at all. I'd be right in there, you know, I'd have held my ground, just saying. Hold that line. But yeah, you know, you saw less and less of them, because as people, you know, became faithful to the new religion, they started turning their back on these, you know, these beings, these races that were helping them the whole time.
Yeah. I mean, I do think for myself, you know, my personal perspective, I think there's some nuance there. I don't think they were ever 100%, you know, go team human go.
Right. But they were team players, I think, on occasion.
I mean, they were. They definitely had series of like the positive interactions.
You have your different groups, like anything else.
I mean, you've met humans. They're never going to be all fun to deal with. So
Right. Absolutely.
I
Right.
think we're all aware
Yeah.
of that. Yeah.
Yes.
So we do certainly have, stories where they're more helpful and there's positive interactions and good relationships.
Mm.
But I think there's always also been, situations where there was tension or, animosity or what have you. And
Mhm.
that's sort of something, if we look globally at the way spirits are, in all sorts of cultures, non-Christian cultures, what have you.
Mhm.
A lot of times we see this sort of diversity where spirits can be helpful or
Mhm.
not. And usually it has to do with what the human is doing.
Right. Blame it on the humans. Exactly.
When in doubt, blame the humans. Yes.
Yeah,
Exactly.
we don't want to be, messing with the fae though. That could work against you as well. And I think if that it takes me back to this question. Did the Druids, I mean, Druids had a very, very good understanding of the earth and all of its beings, elementals. Do you think they had a good relationship with these other magical beings, the Fae or other beings that came, whether it be dimensional or whatever the case may be?
I mean, I think they probably had a better understanding
Mm.
of the spirits that were around them and a structured way to interact with them.
Mhm.
One of the things we find, particularly in Ireland, but not just there, other places as well, but is this idea that, the good folk, the fairies,
Mhm.
demand a certain level of respect
Mhm.
and have certain places that belong to them that they want humans to be respectful towards. Don't mess with their stuff, basically.
Mhm.
And
Right.
then, yeah, to have like a good relationship with them. And this is going way back into the mythology, but it's still, something that's believed today. They're
Mhm.
owed a certain portion of like the harvest and,
Right.
um, milk, alcohol when it's
Mhm.
brewed, things
Mhm.
like that. And as long as we kind of stay in our lane and,
Mhm.
do the things we're supposed to do or not do the things that are disrespectful that they don't want us to do,
Mhm.
then we will be in a good situation with them.
Mhm.
And I certainly think that the historic Druids would have been very much living in that structure, if that makes sense. It would
Yes.
have been reflexive to them.
Mhm.
Don't cut down the fairy tree. Don't say disrespectful things to them.
Still like that. Right. It's
Yeah.
still like that. Yeah, gnomes, you know.
Yeah, it's interesting how much of that has survived for so long.
Right.
When you stop and think about how long certain places have been Christian,
Mhm.
um, with Ireland, again, we're looking at, 1,000, 1,500 years. Iceland, which also has a very strong respect for their spirit people, the
Mhm.
Alfar and the Holy Folk, um, at least 1,000 years being Christian. And yet
Mhm.
still, all this time later, these spirits are still believed in to some degree by most people.
Mhm.
Even the people who will tell you they don't believe in this,
Right.
like, I don't, this is nonsense. I don't believe in that. Those don't exist. But I'm still not going to go cut down that fairy tree.
Yeah,
I'm still
just
not
in
going to be
case.
disrespectful. Right.
Just in case. Better to be safe than sorry.
Right.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, it's amazing how well and how much this has survived.
Mhm.
Um, there's actually a really funny story. I think it's funny. From Ireland. This was written down about 100 years ago. And it was a woman who had been Catholic and would always, when she was milking her cows, give a little bit of milk to the fairies because that's one of the things that you do. And
Right.
then converted to Protestantism, and Protestantism always tends to be a little harsher towards fairies. They're much more like fairies or demons, don't interact with them. So she
Mhm.
stopped giving the milk and she started having all sorts of problems and bad luck and all this stuff happening.
Oh,
So she just went back to giving them the milk. um,
wow.
Even though she converted
Oh,
and that was really frowned on, she just started doing it again. Um,
wow. So it makes you realize you start something, you can't stop.
yeah, you know what?
That's
They're very
great.
fond of dairy products. You don't start doing
Wow.
that and then take it back.
Wow. Dr. Stephen Greer released fairy or images of fairies very recently.
Interesting. I'll have to look
Yeah.
into that.
Yeah. I mean, he's disclosing all kinds of things right now, so it's very fascinating. I don't doubt that they're another race of dimensional, interdimensional beings. I truly think, I mean, they're pretty magical, obviously. So I don't think if you were that sort of a being that you'd be so limited to this physical place. That's just my personal thought.
Yeah, no, that's one of the oldest concepts with these types of spirits.
Mhm.
Like I said, no matter what we're looking at.
Yes.
And this, I should say this again, I keep mentioning Ireland, but that tends to be my main focus. It's the material I'm most familiar with. But, in Ireland, stories about the good folk go back 1,500 years. The
Yes.
oldest story we have written down was written down in the 9th century, but it's based on an earlier text, and based on the language, they date it to the 5th century. So
Yes.
very, very old. And they're just such an integrated part of the culture. But this idea that these are beings who can move in and out of our world, in and out of our reality, it's kind of let a lot of people, I shouldn't say a lot, gross over exaggeration. It has let some
than you think. Yeah.
Some people today to understand them as either being interdimensional or extra-dimensional beings.
Right.
That they live in a dimension that's adjacent to ours, and they can kind of move back and forth between this reality and this one.
I could see that. Usually when you think about stories where, they just kind of turn up on you, I think it's a very strong possibility. I think in this day and age, people may be more open to that concept than in the past, obviously. But mind you, they when you're going back to ancient cultures, I don't think things like this were out of the norm for them. They just weren't, and they just didn't have the same conditioning as we do now. So they didn't have the same fears because it was all part of the history. Much like many of our indigenous people, Native, American or indigenous all over the world have. They have the oral history. They see something, it's like, yes, that's right. Look at the Hopi, Yes, that's part of our oral history. We completely understand it, and we're not at all bothered by it, and it's the way it is. And then meanwhile, you have people that be just like, what? No, it's like, it's very, very, it's very diverse and magic. Yes.
And I've always been fascinated by the fact that these types of spirits are universal. That wherever you go around the globe, they're not going to call them fairies. Of course, they're going to have different terms in their own languages. But
yes,
you have these ideas of these types of spirits that can move in and out of our reality, who can be physical or not physical, who can interact with people, who can be helpful, sometimes dangerous, usually connected to either healing or sickness, things like that. Like it just seems like they're universal. So wherever you go, you're going to run into these beliefs, whatever names are being applied to them. And that fascinates me.
It's very fascinating. I think you just have, different variations that end up being pretty much the same being. I'd like to think, that the ancient people were very much on top of this, and Druids being highly the educated class, and the ones that, the shaman, the healers, the educators, the astrologers, the judicial people. I mean, everything would have had a great understanding of how things worked. If you can refresh my memory, because I'm just drawing a blank with it. Which deity was it that would be in the woods with the big elk horns that they would, is that pagan or is that Druidism, where, they would do sacrifices to this? He was like the forest god.
I mean, different areas, you're going to have probably different versions of that.
Okay.
Probably the one you're thinking of is Kernanos.
Yes, thank you.
Yep, who's Gaulish. He's actually the one, that cauldron that I mentioned that's in Denmark. One of the main images on that, they're not 100% sure, which is what I'm going to be saying about everything this entire interview. Not 100% sure. They think it could also be a shaman wearing like a headdress, but
yes,
a lot of people believe that is an image of Kernanos. remember to pronounce his name correctly occasionally.
Yes.
And he's very connected, in particularly on that cauldron, the Gundestrup cauldron, to wild animals and the forest and nature and all that.
Yes. A curiosity, because I've read that they do have them in North America as well. The same sort of deity or being. So.
Yeah, there's actually a female version that some people talk about in Wales, called Ellen of the Ways, and she's connected to reindeer. For anyone who wasn't already aware, the female reindeer keep their antlers. The male reindeer shed them.
Yes.
So she has this connection to female reindeer and antlers. She's sometimes portrayed or discussed as like an antlered goddess. And she's a really interesting one.
Yes. And why would that be?
Why would she be interesting? Because she's horns.
Yeah, she rocks. Yeah,
she does.
Just more of a curiosity as to. I mean, I've read accounts that they can be pretty aggressive, both counterparts.
Yeah. I just find it fascinating because I think when we talk about horns with deities, we always tend to think of male, of gods with horns.
Yes.
So seeing a female goddess, very redundant, sorry, who has horns, but seeing her attached to a particular species of animal where the female has horns.
Yes.
And like I said, they don't shed them, whereas the male do. So, they have them year round.
So you're really dealing with a female.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's just, it's interesting to me. And being connected to like the wilderness and the forest and hunting and kind of that aspect of survival.
Absolutely.
Interesting stuff to think about.
There's a lot of interesting stuff that you bring up that we have to think about. What I'd like to touch on, of course, because, St. Patrick's, you're not with us on St. Patrick's Day, but there is actually a lot to do with St. Patrick and Druids. And there's quite a bit of information to different records of wizard battles in Judaism and Christianity. And it's noted that St. Patrick encountered Druid wizards who basically, I guess it was, if I pronounce this properly, who were in the service of King Loguire. Does that make sense?
Close enough. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Okay. I'm French. It's not always easy.
You heard me try to say French stuff earlier. It's fine.
So, do you know the story of said wizard wars?
Yeah. So, St. Patrick is super fascinating to me. I've actually written quite a bit about him over the years because we have the actual historic St. Patrick, and I'm about to offend everyone, so just brace yourselves.
Nothing that's stop and put out there, so you go, girl.
Historic St. Patrick actually did almost nothing.
Right.
I'm sorry to burst everyone's bubbles. But he didn't. He came in Ireland, already had a couple bishops and some churches, and he was an evangelist, but he doesn't seem to have been particularly good at it. Right. Also, the pagan Irish at the time were really not having it. But the historic Patrick then spurred this mythic Patrick, and the mythic Patrick is fascinating. And he's the one where we have these hagiographies, which are like saint biographies, that talk about him performing these miracles and driving out the snakes, which Ireland never had snakes. So that was just a freebie miracle.
Yes.
You can't argue he didn't do it because there's no snakes there.
Yes.
And these Druid battles, which, that's a good way to describe it, actually. If you read the stories, it's almost like watching like a soap opera or like a modern day.
I know, it's crazy stuff.
It is. Now, to be fair, the mythic Patrick that shows up in these stories in general is pretty wacky. He goes to the Holy Land and talks directly to Moses. He raises the dead. He was really getting around, doing a lot of things.
Yes.
But literally, I'm trying to think of some of the stuff he did with the Druids that's particularly wacky. prays to God for an earthquake, and the earth opens up and swallows a bunch of druids.
Yes. Yes.
You know, oh, he turned. This is one of my favorite stories, actually. He was being pursued by some evil, Irish pagans and druids, and he turned himself and his whole group into deer with god magic.
Interesting.
Yeah, St. Patrick did.
Yeah, I've not heard that one, but that's why you're the expert.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite stories.
Wow.
And then fled, as deer.
Yeah.
And successfully escaped. So yeah, reading about the mythic Patrick is so fascinating because of how out there the stories are.
Well, I think it's all a matter of so many metaphors, where he uses like his mind to lift, a druid up into the air and smashes into the ground, and the brain was smashed into pieces, and other times where Patrick knelt in prayer until the druids fell and dashed into pieces onto the rocks, and
there's a lot of pieces.
Yeah, right, like fall to pieces. Yeah, but there's a lot of different stories that are similar to that. But I mean, at the end of the day, they say he was responsible for the murders of approximately like 800 druids. Is that correct?
According to the hagiographies, that's what they say.
Wow.
Now, like I said, the actual historic Patrick really didn't do much. But the one that gets written about later, so Patrick lived in the 5th century. I want to say he died in like 460 something, 463, something like that. The first hagiography, the first saint biography, was written in the 8th century, so 300 years later. And then the more famous one was written in the 12th century. So then considerably later.
Right.
So they just got very creative, and they made him like this Catholic superhero. Really? Like,
yes.
The things that he was doing. There's another story, speaking of druids, where he basically gets into like a verbal smackdown with a druid, and they end up agreeing that they're each going to send one of their servants into a burning building.
Yes.
And whoever's god is real will protect the servant. And of course, St. Patrick's servant comes out fine. And then, the druid servant doesn't come out.
Right.
Like, that is like the most ridiculous.
Well,
it sounds like a frat bro dare, honestly.
Right.
Like, we're gonna send our guy in, and whoever's guy comes out wins. Yeah. And a lot of the stories are like that. They're very entertaining to read, but they're very over the top.
Well, I mean, he's got a face off with the devil, and the folklore basically says that Satan was hiding in a cave, but he was defeated, and in his rage, he took a bite out of the mountain, and it's called the Devil's Bit. Yep. And this is because, Patrick had a face off with him, and I guess just peeved him off to the point where it's just like there's some interesting things that are out there. I guess it's just trying to break down, what essentially, what's what, when you get back into like there's different devil stories when it comes to St. Patrick, but realistically, it's like
one of the most interesting things about St. Patrick, mythic St. Patrick, is that when he got popular, for some reason, and I have my conspiracy theory ideas for why this is, but for some reason, he became like the Irish super saint. And we see him, seriously though, we see him then replacing a lot of the pagan heroes or even the pagan gods in folklore and in stories. So, for example, there's a pagan holiday called Lunasa, also the name of the month of August in Irish, but the holiday that starts the month is named Lunasa as well. And one of the stories that they think was originally pagan to do with this was that there's this god figure called Crom Cruach, who is probably an analogy for the devil, but that's a separate conversation. But he comes in and he's basically trying to wreck the harvest, and he has this giant magical bull. and they're trying to destroy everything. And they think originally it was Lu, the pagan god Lu.
Okay.
Who defeats him and wins the harvest, so that the people don't starve all winter. Yay. But what we see happening then is that the story gets changed so that it's St. Patrick doing that. St. Patrick then comes in and defeats Cromcrooch and stops the bull and saves the harvest.
Oh boy.
But it's just it's interesting to see how that happens, so that he gets this position in the folklore and folk belief, by 200-300 years ago up through today, where he's the one who gets inserted into all of these stories, the big hero.
There is. I know there's one that is involves a sea serpent or some monster serpent of type. There's one, right? And then there's the one where there's what is it, a big warthog or something that's going after the crops, and he comes in there and I'll get rid of the devil. Meanwhile, he goes out and it's like a warthog, right? So it's like not
Those
hard.
could be scary. It could be scary.
I guess it could be, yeah, but it really gives you a sense of the times, how people really, embellish some of these things, and it was so easy to say, oh no, this was a thing here, but I'll save you with my staff. I love it. I love old folklore and tradition. I love hearing these type of stories. To me, it's just so wild, because so much of it it's just like a lot of it's metaphors. A lot of it's like you say, there's just sort of, let's just insert and go.
Well, and I love the fact that, basically the mythic Patrick, the one we've been talking about here, has so totally erased the actual boring one, which, that's fairies boring, but
boring one,
that most people don't even know that, the actual historic Patrick, he basically showed up. He founded a church. He
was Roman, wasn't he? Wasn't he Roman?
Yes, he was a Roman born in, they believe, Wales, but his father was a Roman official.
Roman and Druids.
Well, that's why I said I have some conspiracy theories about how St. Patrick in particular ended up as like the saint of Ireland. When he's not Irish originally.
No.
Conspiracies. Yes.
Right. True.
And ironic conspiracies.
Yes.
Yes. But obviously there's obviously significance to the fact that he has so much power and so much of a hold over the culture as this mythic figure that's sort of been created. And yet he is so well known and so famous that people don't even realize the real guy was kind of boring and didn't do much. Yes.
So he's just a guy. I don't know, you can't beat the Wizard Wars. I'm just saying. Like this.
I do recommend people read the story just for the entertainment value. Like, he literally goes and becomes Moses' BFF and talks to the burning bush. Like, there's all kinds of wacky things that happen.
Right.
And I'm just like, this must have been super entertaining back in the 12th century to have read to you.
Oh man, I'll tell you, it confuses things a little bit. People would kind of wonder why our history is just so all over the map. It's just so full of like, what was that? Is this real? Is this not real? Is this,
I will say, when you look at Catholic saints today, like the ones that have been canonized in the last 100 years or so.
Yes.
They are so boring compared to the saints of like 1,000, 1,500 years ago.
Yes.
So like Saint Bridget, who's Ireland's other, big main saint, actually is Irish.
Yes.
Probably based on a pagan goddess, but again, we don't know for sure.
Yes.
Kind of where the crossover happened there. But when you look at like her stories, it's like honestly watching a soap opera. Like, she was born in a doorway, and like lightning struck when she was born, and then she wouldn't drink any milk except from this white cow, which is obviously a symbol of like purity and sacredness. And she was performing miracles when she was like 6 years old.
See, there we go. This is what Contessa was just saying. I thought they had to perform miracles to become a saint. Yes, she did. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so St. Patrick got rid of the snakes and toads, basically all poisonous, venomous reptiles is what the actual original story says, which Ireland doesn't have those. So again, it's a very convenient story.
Right.
St. Bridget, one of her stories was that she gave away, she was so pious, she was such a good person. She gave away all of the food in her father's house, which he was not happy about for obvious reasons. And so she performed a miracle basically where the food restocked itself, everything refilled, so they still had plenty of food. That was one of her first miracles. I think she has a miracle with beer too. She has some really cool stories.
Yeah.
Endless rivers of beer. I mean,
wow. I like that. I like that saint. This is kind of good.
So yeah, any of the older Irish saints, if you read their stories, they are just very entertaining.
They are indeed. So I've got a couple of I've got a question. Michael asks, do you have any comment on the super wealthy family in Milan, Italy, that brought a UFO from the mountains of Italy to the Vatican? The craft was supposed to have happened around the time of the Druids. Do you know anything about that?
I don't personally. That's a little outside, again, my particular focus. I'd assume you're talking like the Medici family, because there's all sorts of interesting stories about them in Italy. And I know that there's a lot of stories about the Vatican and what they may or may not or may have in their vaults.
Sure are. Yeah, they do have an extraterrestrial skull.
Honestly, I would not be surprised about anything.
Yes.
You could say they have mummified Sasquatch in their vaults, and I'd be like, okay.
I think they have it all, really. I mean, who's going to go check?
Well, and the thing is, when you stop and think about it, the Catholic Church had such immense power over such a wide area for such a long amount of time that, again, like there's very little that could be in there that I would be surprised by.
Yes.
Because when you have that kind of power and that kind of influence and range, you can end up with a lot of interesting things in your personal vault.
There's a lot that's starting to surface in this current day and age, which is going to make it very interesting moving forward, I think. Contessa asks, what miracles did St. Patrick perform? She goes, I'm very curious.
I mean, not all of these are things that we would necessarily count as miracles today, but the things like turning his retinue into deer. And again, these are the later stories. Supposedly, this is not one of my favorite stories. Supposedly, he had come across these two young women when they were bathing. Make of that what you will. And they were the daughters of a druid or a druid king. I can't remember. I honestly can't remember exactly. But they were pagans, and he was trying to convert them, and they were trying to explain, like, no, our gods are in the air and the sky and the sea and the water and the land and the mountains and blah, blah, blah. But then he does eventually convince them, to convert to Christianity, at which point they immediately die. So again, make of that what you will. But that would be considered one of his miracles too, that he converted these two pagan princesses, that they became so instantly righteous that they went up to heaven. I make of that what you will. It's a very sketchy story when you look at it from a 21st century lens, but that was considered one of his miracles. And a lot of the druid battles, the getting rid of the venomous reptiles, the snakes and the toads.
Don't forget the sea monster.
Yep, that's a good one. Sea monster, the pest, which is it's an Irish term, but it's basically like a giant monstrous worm.
Oh, yes, right. That's right.
Yeah, he supposedly got rid of all of the demons in Ireland. Which is a very impressive miracle.
Right.
Just all of them. Every
Right.
single one. That's all him.
All at once. That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. So, yeah, he has a lot of stuff like that attributed to him.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, obviously somebody totally, believed all of this stuff.
Yeah. When I think
there he was as a saint.
Yeah, I think that, when we look at it today, some of it just seems, I don't want to say patently ridiculous, but hard to credit, like turning himself and his group into deer, for example. But these were things that people did believe. They believed it literally. That is what happened. That, all of these things we're talking about, the Druid throwdowns and the crushed and firehouse and all of that other stuff, that all happened, it literally.
Well, I mean, 800 druids, responsible for the murder of 800 druids. Were there that many even to start with? Like, there couldn't have been many more. They were the upper crust, of their societies or communities. So, I mean, that would have been a really big hit.
Yeah, there's also another thing that's attributed to him in this later story is this idea that he burned this Druid library. But there's no evidence that existed. There's no evidence that Druids wrote their stuff down in that way. So that does seem to be one of these things that, again, you're taking credit for something that you can't disprove.
Well, if it was all oral history, they never wrote anything down. It makes it interesting. I mean, who knows? Maybe something will eventually surface. Maybe that's just saying, oh, that's why it doesn't exist. Like it is really fascinating to me, but I'm not at all surprised about the connections. I mean, I didn't think that they were as far into Europe as they were, but I remembered, I had to bring up the name of this book that I wanted to share because I remember one time I did a show and it came down to the fact that there was a strong belief that, people from, the UK and all of these areas around it actually they were descended from the pharaohs. And I remember the host mentioning a book, and you may want to write it down. Maybe you've heard of it. It's called The Kingdom of the Ark by Lorraine Evans. The startling story of how the ancient British race is descended from the pharaohs. And there's some really compelling stuff in there for sure. If you're looking at, Queen Scotia as being the mother of the whole area. But I thought, wow, so it wouldn't be a far-fetched idea that they had just made their way, as part of the Celts, let's say, made their way to just span through different parts of Europe and upward, and then it would make a lot of sense. So good old St. Patrick may not have gotten them all. Just saying.
Yeah, I definitely think there's, and I think this had come up as a comment in the chat, and I'm not going to remember who said it, so I apologize. But someone basically saying all of our history is wrong. I don't think it's 100% wrong, but history is definitely written by the victors, and I do think we've lost a lot because of things not being recorded or things not surviving. We have a good amount of Irish mythology, but we know we've lost a lot because there'll be references to stories that we don't have anymore. And that's actually true for the Norse too. There's quite a bit of material like the Prose Edda where they'll reference this story that would have been well known at the time, which is why they don't write it down, because everyone knows the story of King Rolaf and his whatever.
Yes.
But now we don't anymore. We have no idea what it is. We don't know what it's about. It just did not survive. And the same thing with how certain things happened, how certain groups of people got to a different place. We don't know because it wasn't recorded, or it was recorded in such a skewed way that now, we're kind of trying to piece things together. Talking about ancestry, to give you an example, because you're talking about the Egyptian thing, Iceland as we all know, I assume, was settled by the Norse, various Norse cultures. They were doing DNA testing, I want to say this is like 10, 15 years ago now, and found out that a large percentage of the people in Iceland have Irish ancestry as well. And it kind of eventually came out that this was because on their way to Iceland, they had this habit of stopping in Ireland and acquiring unwilling people.
Good way to put it.
To go with them.
Yes. Yes.
And this was also why they think some of the beliefs about spirits in Iceland are very similar to the Irish ones, because those people would have brought those beliefs with them.
Yes.
But it's one of these things where, like, if we didn't have DNA testing, if we didn't have sort of what we have now, we wouldn't know as much about that as we do. A lot of it has come about because of the science that we have, because they were not making records where they were like, well, we kidnapped 100 women from Ireland, who are now our wives and our servants.
Yes.
They tended to leave those details out a lot in the written history.
Sure. Can't understand why, but it also comes down to the narrative, when you're looking at the old saying, he who controls the past controls the future.
Yep.
There's a lot of missing information in many cultures, and it just sort of gets buried. But I can assure you, people like the Vatican, have all of those missing pieces. And if it doesn't fit the narrative, then it just doesn't get told.
Yeah. Well, and stories have such a huge impact on us and on what we believe, and then the St. Patrick thing kind of shows that a lot. But when we're only telling certain kinds of stories, we're only forwarding certain ideas and certain beliefs, that everything else kind of gets left behind. And it's interesting the way that has the power that it has. And I'm going to be horribly dated here and say, when the musical Hamilton came out, it rewrote a lot of things for people who didn't really know a lot about that period of American history. We kind of know, like, okay, George Washington, it sort of sucked. And then, the U.S. colonies won and were independent, and that was it. And then this play comes out, this musical that's extremely popular and has a different perspective on the story.
Yes.
And kind of on the founding of the country. And all of a sudden, that's what everyone understands the history to be. Whether it's accurate or not, that's how everyone now understands who Hamilton was in that period of time and all this other stuff. And I think people really underestimate how powerful storytelling is.
Yes. I mean, storytelling, it does fall into. I mean, I think a lot of it started with your oral history of just going and going and going, and things sort of get embellished. You got some great tales being flung around by the fire every night. I think it's a dying art, though, personally.
Unfortunately, I do agree with you. And I do think it's really sad that, we're losing that storyteller, that especially that oral storyteller, that used to be just such a foundational thing in every culture.
I believe our indigenous people and our native people definitely keep that alive. I know so many, and they just off the top of their heads will come up with incredible things. But I think we're in an age of technology, and you can do two things with it. You could take advantage of it and learn as much as possible, bearing in mind that what you're seeing online has been written and rewritten, and it's not like the old days of picking up a book and looking at it and seeing things for what they are. Things get corrupted along the way in the age of technology. And now we have, newer technology that makes it even harder. You can't even look at a photo, an article, and actually say, is this real? Is it not real? Like, it makes it very, very difficult.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And I think that, it's that mixed blessing of, we have so much more access than we used to have, and we have access to so much more in a sense of like further than we used to have. But it's so overwhelming You know, so much getting thrown at us all the time, that it's hard to filter out, you know, what we should be listening to or what has value and what is just noise.
Yeah. Lots of noise. And we all, I won't say all of us, a lot of us have tunnel vision. You're looking at a device and you don't see past this, and you're just so much information out there to be had. You know, and wherever you know, I travel throughout the world, I try to get into some museums. I try to get into some I'm always in historical places because I want to see what it's really about. You know, and that's just something with the Jews that you just can't go and find. I can't go to, you know, like, you know, because I have been to the UK. I can't go back there and say, okay, I want to just see, you know, where the Druids were. I want to see. You can see modern day stuff, and it's great because there's enough tradition that's been passed down or that they have held onto, so you could maybe participate in a really nice ceremony or something. But you really don't have a place where you can go to see how they really lived, how, you know, how they really did things. Like, there's no way of really knowing that.
No, there's definitely a lot that's been lost over time. Like I was saying, there's this idea that we don't know anything, which isn't true, because we do have a decent amount of information, but it's also sort of like piecing things together, piecing clues together, and trying to figure out what would have been, you know, back then.
Yes.
This is just a random thing, but it's a good example, I think. The chariot shows up a lot in older Irish mythology and stories. It's like this key thing, chariot fighting and chariot travel. And there's been a debate for a long time now because we don't have the archaeological evidence to support that they had chariots. So it's kind of this idea of like, did they actually have this, or is this something that just entered the story and then gets repeated? And it seems like they probably did at some point very far back, and then it got lost, and then it just became a story motif that gets passed on. But it's just sort of an example of the way that you know, something gets lost, and then we don't really know for sure what it was. And it's the same thing a lot with the Druids. Like, we know they were there, we know they were priests, we know they did certain things, but we don't know how they did rituals. We don't know how they prayed. We don't, you know, all of that has kind of been lost. So it's putting all these clues together.
Well, I mean, there has to be something out there. I wanted to just, for all of our audio listeners out there, she goes, me and a few people found a Druid burial site in early 2009 between the towns of, I'm going to butcher this. So I don't know if you can you pronounce this? Medjugorje and Mostar, Bosnia and Herzegovina. If I butchered it, I apologize. I can't French. So, but burial sites. Where are the burial sites? You had 800 of them that were apparently taken down in Ireland by St. Patrick. Where are they? Do we have any idea?
I mean, we certainly have folklore and stories about it. We have a story in one part of Ireland, which is supposedly the place the Druids had their last stand. There's certain places that are known, like these are usually, I will be clear, these aren't actually Druid gravestones because they're like Neolithic monuments, but they might be called like the Druid's grave. And it's this idea that these stories come up around them that say like, this is where that happened. This is where this person is buried. Again, it just gets really difficult to know. Like, we do have certain locations where they find bodies and grave goods, but we don't know for sure if that person, right, if they were a prince or just a warrior or nobility, or it's just so
they're basically lost to us.
Yeah,
it's that sort of history that's just lost to us unless they come forward and say, hey, you know, because I mean, if you're doing, you know, mass killings, you could be in a mass grave, and who's going to come in behind you after that and honor you?
Yeah, it's a lot of piecing clues together and then making our best guesses
Yes.
as to what is going on or what that was or any of that. So
Yeah.
there's a site in Iceland, which is a volcano, that they found a lot of bodies, and it took them a while. They eventually, their best guess was that these were people that they were being sacrificed. And again, for context, this was a very long time ago, 1,000 years. Not in favor of human sacrifice.
Right.
But from a historic perspective,
it's the way it was in many ancient cultures, right?
But they believe that people were being sacrificed to the volcano, to the spirit of the volcano or the god of the volcano, because Iceland is very seismically active. And the thought was, well, this was a way to try to appease that spirit so the volcano wouldn't erupt, which makes sense with the information we have. But again, we don't 100% know that for sure. There's just no way to be certain. It just makes sense based on the clues that we have.
Well, it's definitely been enlightening.
We've been all over the map this time.
we have, but I think there's just so much. There's just so much. I had to do St. Patrick's because you're not with us, for close to St. Patrick's Day, and there is the correlation, between.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, he's such a fascinating topic anyway, because, like I said, that myth has just become so enormous and so powerful. And then that led us into talking about stories. So there we go.
I know, no, but I love it. I love things to be laid back, and I just love to go out there with whatever surfaces, And I think the idea was, again, for me, was not a lot of people who have come on and said bam, bam, bam with Druids. So sometimes it gets really hard to get people to focus on it because, unless this is what you do, you're folklorist, you research, you write about it. And I figured that you would be an ideal person to actually talk about this. And a lot of people just mix up, pagans and Celts and Druids is all one big ball, but it's really very diverse. And there's different levels to all of it. It's not all the same.
No, definitely. It's like layers.
Yes.
I almost said a parfait. I've been watching way too much Shrek with my kids. I'm sorry.
Right. It's all right.
Throwing in a random Shrek reference. But it is. It's like they're interconnected, but they're distinct.
Yes. Yes. Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed the show, and I am so grateful that you were able to join us this evening. And you are back in May. And it's going to be really interesting topic in May, because you see you're getting a lot of
May's gonna be a fun one.
Yeah, there's well, we've got the topic written down. I'm not going to totally blow it right now, but just know it's going to be exciting as always. So we're going to have a lot of fun with it. So before we sign off, tell people how to find you, tell people what you have coming up, books, anything of that nature.
Sure. Well, I'm not going to actually say my book coming out in May, because that's what we're talking about next time, and it'll spoil.
Yeah, that's right. That's why I'm not saying anything.
I have a book coming out in May, but I do have a book coming out in September as well, called Pantheon the Irish, which is talking about Irish paganism, a little bit about Druids, a lot about the spirituality and the Irish gods and all that. So that'll be out later this year. And where can you find me? Sadly, everywhere on social media.
Wow.
So at this point, it's and I'm always under my name. I know there's a lot of like fake accounts and stuff that are out there now. So it's always just gonna be my name. I never ask people for money. I don't do readings. I don't do any of that stuff. But you can, if you have any questions like from the show, I'm on all of the major social media platforms, unfortunately. And if you're interested in any of my books, Amazon is a good option. Brick and mortar stores, if those still exist around you.
Right. Right. She's everywhere. Find her on social media. And, I put any links that you've given me in the past, I've put into the show description so they could find you that way as well. Awesome. So until until May. I'm really looking forward to it. And thank you so very much for joining me tonight.
Thank you for having me on. I really enjoyed it. And I love that we covered so much ground and got to so many fun topics.
Oh, lighthearted and informative. I wouldn't have it any other way. So, and of course, everybody in chat just makes it that much more fun.
Yeah, we had some really good comments.
Yeah. Oh, they're great. They're great. So sometimes they get pretty feisty in there. They're great tonight.
Next time we'll be feisty.
Exactly. Hello from Rumble. We are and have been ignorant, petrified, even in our vulnerabilities, the emotional aspects of ourselves, traumatized through our ancestors' experience, multiple generations of our blood and our heart remembers. It does, 100%. It's kind of like that generational imprinting, it's crazy, just crazy.
You pass stuff on.
I know. Well, thank you all for watching. And thank you, Morgan. I will be in touch.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Pleasure. Thank you. Well, everybody, thank you for watching the show tonight. Remember, Tuesday night, Jamie Corsterfine, manager of the award-winning City of the Dead tours in Edinburgh, Scotland. You definitely do not want to miss that. 2 p.m. Tuesday afternoon, Beyond the Outer Realm. Wednesday night, Dr. Rita Louise, The Dysfunctional Dance of the Empath and the Narcissist. Thursday welcomes back David Stig Hansen, part 2 of his Atlantis research, but in North America. We're popping over to this side of the world. So big thank you to the United Public Radio Network, UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 FM, 107.7 FM. And I think I got it all. Yes. Big thank you to our sponsors, Folgers Coffee. Big thank you to Justice Snickers, Steve McGinnis. We appreciate you all very much. And we appreciate everyone in the chat room. Thank you for tuning in. Have a great weekend. We'll see you Tuesday afternoon. Good night.